Under the blazing sun, a faint cry echoed across the vast savannah, breaking the stillness of the land. Mama Kessie, a lone, elderly woman, carefully followed the sound, her heart pounding with each cautious step. As she parted the tall grass, a small, trembling figure came into view, its fur as white as the clouds, its wide eyes filled with fear. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Mama Kessie knelt, extending a gentle hand, the air thick with anticipation. What had begun as an ordinary walk was about to become something extraordinary. The setting sun bathed the cracked earth in golden light, casting long shadows across the land. In the distance, towering baobab trees stood like ancient guardians, their thick, twisted branches reaching toward the sky. At the edge of this quiet wilderness stood a small hut, made of mud and straw, leaning slightly as if weary from years of enduring the relentless sun and strong winds. This humble home belonged to Mama Kessie, a widowed woman who had lived alone for many years. Emerging from her hut, her back slightly bent from age and years of labor, she draped a simple cloth over her shoulders and gripped a woven basket in her weathered hands. Her face, etched with the lines of hardship, carried a quiet strength as she gazed across the horizon. Not far away, the village of Baobab was alive with noise and movement, so different from Mama Kessie's quiet solitude. She rarely ventured there. Since losing her family to a devastating drought long ago, she had chosen a life of isolation. Barefoot, she moved steadily across the uneven ground, pausing now and then to gather dry twigs and branches into her basket. The only sounds accompanying her were the distant calls of birds and the whisper of the wind through the grass, a reminder that life still thrived in this vast wilderness. For a moment, Mama Kessie straightened her back, adjusted the basket on her hip, and turned to look at her small home, a simple, quiet place, yet the only one she could call her own. The morning sun hung low, casting a warm glow over the savannah as Mama Kessie continued her slow journey, her basket already half full of firewood. She paused, wiping the sweat from her brow with the edge of her shawl. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she barely noticed it over the rustling wind. She stopped, tilting her head to listen. Then the sound came again, a weak, trembling cry, like that of a lost child. Her heartbeat quickened. Gripping her walking stick, she scanned the grass and scattered trees. The cries grew louder, pulling her deeper into the wilderness. Carefully, she pushed aside a patch of tall grass and gasped. Lying on the ground was a tiny, shivering creature, its white fur stark against the earthy tones of the savannah. It trembled, its large eyes brimming with fear. Mama Kessie's breath hitched as she took in the sight before her. It was a baby albino baboon. The little creature let out another soft, helpless cry, its small hands reaching toward the air, searching for someone, for something. Mama Kessie's heart softened as she knelt down, careful not to startle the tiny creature curled up in the grass. "Oh, little one," she murmured, her voice gentle and soothing, like a mother comforting a child. "Why are you all alone?" The baby baboon flinched at the sound of her voice, its frail body tense with fear. Mama Kessie did not rush. She remained still, her presence as quiet as the morning breeze. Slowly, she extended her hand, palm open, a silent promise that she meant no harm. "It's all right," she whispered, her tone warm and reassuring. For a moment, the little baboon hesitated, its wide, fearful eyes locked onto hers. Then, with a tremble, its tiny hand reached forward, brushing against her fingers. A smile spread across Mama Kessie's face as she carefully scooped up the fragile creature, cradling it in her arms. It was so small, so light, its soft fur like silk against her calloused hands. She rocked it gently, her touch tender and protective. "You're safe now," she murmured. The baby baboon let out one last exhausted whimper before nuzzling into her chest, its breathing slowing, its fear fading. A warmth filled Mama Kessie's heart, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Balancing her basket on one hip and holding the tiny baboon close, she started the walk back to her hut. As they moved through the golden grass, she spoke softly to the little one, her voice full of quiet affection. "I will call you Ashu," she said. "You will be my little hope." Days turned into weeks, and the once frail baboon began to thrive. At first, Ashu was timid, never straying far from Mama Casey's side. He clung to the edge of her shawl or sat quietly beside her as she wove baskets. But as time passed, his confidence grew. His curious eyes explored every corner of the hut, and soon he followed Mama Casey wherever she went. One crisp morning, as Mama Casey set out to gather firewood, Ashu bounded after her, his white fur gleaming in the golden sunlight. With boundless energy, he mimicked her every movement, picking up small sticks and carefully placing them into her basket. Mama Casey chuckled, her warm laughter blending with the whispers of the wind across the savannah. "What a clever little helper you are," she said, ruffling the soft fur on his head. Ashu chirped happily and scurried off in search of more twigs. As the months turned into years, Ashu grew tall and strong. His once slender arms grew strong, his small frame filling out with firm, lean muscles. Yet, despite his impressive size, he remained as gentle and playful as ever, always mindful not to harm Mama Casey. He quickly became her most dependable companion, carrying heavy bundles of firewood with ease, scaling towering baobab trees to collect sweet fruit, and even fetching water from the stream, balancing a clay pot with remarkable skill. One day, as Mama Casey wove her baskets, she glanced up to see Ashu carefully tying bundles of sticks together with a rope. Clapping her hands with delight, she beamed. "Ashu, you've learned so much," she said, pride glowing in her eyes. Ashu grinned, lifting the neatly tied bundle with a proud gleam in his eyes. What was once a quiet hut, filled only with the whisper of the wind, now brimmed with laughter and life. Ashu's playful spirit filled every corner. He loved swinging from the branches of the great tree near their home, his white fur stark against the lush green leaves. Sometimes he would leap down without warning, his mischievous grin widening as Mama Casey let out a startled gasp. She would shake her finger at him in mock scolding, but it always ended with a warm chuckle. More than his strength, it was Ashu's intelligence that amazed Mama Casey. He seemed to understand not just her words, but also her emotions. When Mama Casey was weary, Ashu would sit beside her, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder, as if to say, "I'm here." On days when sorrow crept into her heart, he would tug playfully at her shawl or make silly faces until she smiled again. To Mama Casey, Ashu was more than just an animal. He was her family, her companion, the light that filled a once lonely life. Their simple days brought her a happiness she hadn't known in years. But as Ashu grew, so did the whispers in the nearby village. People who caught glimpses of the towering white baboon murmured uneasily. At first, they were mere whispers, drifting through the marketplace like dust in the wind. "He's too big," someone murmured. "No animal should grow that large," another muttered. "It's unnatural. Maybe he's cursed." The murmurs slithered through the village, curling into ears like the hissing of unseen serpents. Mama Casey ignored the gossip. To her, Ashu was no curse. He was a gift, a miracle. Nothing else mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Mama Casey watched Ashu swing joyfully from the tree branches. His laughter, full of life, echoed through the twilight. "You're special, Ashu," she said softly. love and pride in her voice. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. At first, the stories of the unusual white baboon were mere whispers within the village. But soon, they spread beyond, carried by traders and travelers, twisting and growing with every telling. People spoke of his size, his strength, and even whispered that he understood human speech. One day, Mama Kessie made the rare decision to visit the village market, needing supplies she couldn't gather herself. Ashu walked beside her, carrying a small basket in his strong arm. As they entered the bustling marketplace, the usual cheerful chatter faded. One by one, villagers turned to stare. A hush fell over the crowd, thick with unease. Even the market's usual lively chatter faltered, replaced by hurried whispers and nervous glances. Mothers pulled their children close. Men exchanged wary glances. "Is that him?" someone whispered. "The white baboon they've been talking about?" "It's not normal," another muttered, voice unsteady. Ashu felt their fearful stares like a weight pressing down on him. His grip on the basket tightened, his shoulders hunching instinctively, as if trying to shrink under their gaze. Mama Kessie gently touched his arm. "Don't worry, Ashu," she said softly. "They just don't understand you," she murmured, but there was a quiet sorrow in her voice, as if she feared they never would. But her comforting words did little to ease the tension in the air. As Mama Kessie approached a fruit stall, the vendor quickly stepped back, his face pale. You can't stay here," he stammered, eyes darting nervously to Ashu. "That thing doesn't belong in the village." Mama Kessie's expression hardened. "He's not a thing. His name is Ashu, and he is part of my family." The vendor shook his head, refusing to meet her gaze. Around them, the whispers grew louder. "It's a bad omen," someone muttered. "What if it turns violent?" another voice asked. Ashu shifted uneasily, sensing the fear and suspicion in the crowd. His confused eyes met Mama Kessie's, silently asking what to do. "Let's go home," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. Holding her head high, she turned and walked away. Ashu followed, trying to make himself seem smaller. But the murmurs didn't stop. In the days that followed, whispers turned into wild rumors. Some claimed they had seen Ashu lifting massive logs with ease. Others swore they had heard him make sounds eerily close to human speech. Fear twisted the truth, and soon, some villagers began calling him a spirit, or worse, a demon. "He's too smart for an animal," an elder warned. "No creature like that should exist." And then, as if the village's fears had summoned misfortune, the dry season arrived. Then came the dry season. The relentless sun baked the savannah, and Mama Kessie, who had always been strong despite her years, began to weaken. At first, it was subtle. She moved more slowly, needed to rest more often. But soon, even the simplest tasks, like weaving baskets or gathering firewood, became too much for her. One morning, as Ashu carried a bundle of sticks back to their hut, Mama Kessie stumbled and dropped her basket. She leaned against a tree, her breathing shallow and labored. Ashu rushed to her side, gently touching her shoulder. "I'm just tired, Ashu," she said softly, forcing a weak smile. But Ashu noticed how her hands trembled as she tried to pick up the basket. Her steps, once firm and steady, were now hesitant, as if the very ground beneath her had become unsteady. In the following days, Mama Kessie remained inside the hut, too weak to go out. Ashu took over her daily chores, gathering firewood, fetching water from the stream, and even attempting to cook, though his large hands struggled with the delicate tasks. Every evening he sat by her bedside, his worried eyes never leaving her. He would watch the slow rise and fall of her chest, silently willing her to grow stronger. But no matter how much he tried, fetching water, bringing her the ripest fruits, even attempting to cook, nothing seemed to bring back her strength. One night, under a sky full of stars, Mama Kesi reached out and took Ashu's hand. Her touch was soft, her skin cool against his warm fur. "You've been so good to me, Ashu," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Ashu tilted his head, his golden eyes searching hers, pleading for answers. She gave a quiet laugh, though it was weak. "I'm just getting old, my boy," she said. "My time is almost over." The words hit Ashu like a sudden gust of wind, cold and unforgiving. His breath caught in his throat, and he shook his head violently. No, that couldn't be true. She had always been there, strong, steady, unbreakable. She couldn't just leave. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead against her hand. He couldn't imagine life without her, the one person who had cared for him, who had shown him love when no one else did. The next morning, Mama Kesi's condition worsened. Her breathing was shallow, her voice barely a whisper. Ashu sat by her side, holding her frail hand in his large one, as if his presence alone could give her strength. By midday, Ashu realized he couldn't help her alone. She needed someone who could. Rising to his full height, he hesitated, looking back at her one last time before stepping outside. Mama Kesi gave him a weak smile, her eyes full of love. "Be careful, my boy," she whispered, her voice fading into the wind. Without hesitation, Ashu sprinted toward the village, his heart pounding like a war drum. The dry grass crunched beneath his powerful strides, but he barely noticed. He had to move faster. He had to find help. Behind him, the hut grew smaller, quieter. A terrible fear clawed at his chest. What if he was already too late? The usual busy sounds of the village came to an abrupt stop as he approached. Women paused in their weaving, children stopped playing, and the men, gripping their tools, tightened their hold. Eyes widened, mouths parted in shock. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air, heavy, uneasy. Then the whispers began. A woman carrying vegetables froze, her eyes wide with fear. Children who had been playing with sticks dropped their toys and ran home. "It's the white creature!" someone shouted. Ashu slowed his pace, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He let out soft, pleading noises, hoping they would understand he meant no harm. But the villagers saw only his towering size and unnatural color. Fear took hold. "He's here to attack us!" a man yelled, grabbing a stick. More villagers emerged, their faces shadowed with suspicion. Some picked up stones, others clutched farming tools, their hands trembling. Ashu took a cautious step back, his hands still raised in surrender. But the crowd pressed forward, their fear twisting into something darker, anger. "Get the nets!" someone shouted. Before he could react, a thick rope net flew over him. He struggled, but more came, tangling around his arms and legs. A loud, pained cry escaped his lips, echoing through the village. "Don't let him escape!" Another man barked as they pulled the ropes tighter, forcing him to the ground. Ashu's golden eyes darted across the crowd, searching desperately for someone, anyone, who might help. For a brief moment, hesitation flickered in a few faces. His cry held pain, not aggression. But fear was louder than reason. They bound him tightly and dragged him toward an old wooden shed at the village's edge. Ashu stopped struggling. He lay still, his breath ragged, his eyes filled with sorrow. The heavy doors slammed shut. Footsteps retreated, leaving only the hushed murmurs of the villagers. Inside the dimly lit shed, Ashu slumped against the rough wooden wall. His golden eyes, once brimming with curiosity, had dulled with sadness. The ropes cut into his skin, but the true weight pressing down on him was not from the bindings. It was the burden of failure. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting the village in hues of orange and red. The whispers continued. "Why did it come here?" a man asked, gripping a spear. "Maybe it wanted to attack us," another replied. "No animal should look or act like that. It's unnatural." But not everyone agreed. An elderly woman, leaning on a walking stick, frowned thoughtfully. "It didn't look dangerous," she murmured. "It seemed afraid." Her words were lost beneath louder voices. "We can't risk it," a younger man insisted. "It's too dangerous to keep it here." Inside the shed, Ashu shifted slightly, testing the ropes. They only tightened, biting into his fur. A low, mournful sound rumbled in his chest. His thoughts drifted to Mama Kessie. He had left to find help, but now he was the one trapped. And she was alone, waiting for him. A small shadow crept toward the shed. A young boy, curious yet cautious, tiptoed closer, his breath barely making a sound. Peering through the gaps in the wooden planks, his wide eyes met Ashu's. For a moment, neither moved. Then, something shifted. The boy's eyes softened. But before he could inch closer, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Get away from there!" The boy flinched, his small hands curling into fists. He hesitated, then quickly backed away. Ashu lowered his head. Outside, the villagers' fearful whispers carried on, blending with the rustling wind. And far away, in the little hut on the savannah, Mama Kessie waited and waited until she could wait no longer. For a second time, the boy's gaze met Ashu's through the cracks in the shed. His initial fear wavered as he stared into those golden eyes. There was no fury in them, no threat, only sorrow. "It's crying," the boy whispered. "What are you doing? Stay back!" a stern voice barked. An adult hand gripped the child's shoulder, pulling him away. Outside, the villagers' voices grew louder, their arguments overlapping. Some demanded Ashu be driven out immediately. Others hesitated, doubt creeping into their voices. Then, the village elder, Mz Baraka, stepped forward. His deep, steady voice sliced through the noise. "Enough!" Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. "We cannot act out of fear," Mz Baraka said, his wise eyes sweeping across the villagers. "We must first understand why it has come." A heavy stillness settled over the crowd. Though no one spoke, their uneasy glances at the shed made their fear clear. Inside, Ashu listened to their muffled voices, the words only half understood. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of despair. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for Mama Kessie. She needed him, and he had no way to help her. In her small, simple hut, Mama Kessie lay still on her bed. Her body was weak, fragile. The soft golden light of the setting sun slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls, gently illuminating her face. Her breaths came slow and shallow, each one requiring more effort than the last. The hut was silent, save for the faint whisper of the wind outside. Without Ashu, the space felt emptier, colder. With trembling fingers, Mama Kessie reached toward the door, as if willing him to walk through it at any moment. "Ashu," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Her tired eyes fluttered open, scanning the room for her dear companion. But he wasn't there. A quiet sadness settled in her heart. She knew why he had left, knew he had gone to find help. And she was proud of him, proud of his courage, proud of the kindness he carried within him. But deep down, she also knew the truth. Her time was slipping away, her strength had faded, her body had grown too weak. Memories of Ashu filled her mind, drifting in like a gentle dream. She saw the day she had found him, a tiny, frightened creature, alone in the wilderness. She thought of his playful nature, his quiet understanding, the way he had filled her once lonely days with warmth and love. He had given her something she thought she had lost forever: joy, family. A soft smile touched her lips. "You gave me so much, Ashu," she murmured. "You were my help, my heart, my family." Her frail hand fell to her side, too weak to stay lifted. Her breathing slowed, softer, lighter. Then, with a final gentle sigh, Mama Casey closed her eyes. Her face was peaceful, as though she had simply drifted into a deep, restful sleep. The hut fell silent, save for the wind's soft whispers, carrying her spirit to the heavens. Far away, locked inside the shed, Ashu let out a mournful cry. A shudder ran through him, a sorrow so deep it felt as if the world had gone still. Something inside him had gone silent forever. The space around him felt heavier, colder. The morning sun rose over the village, casting long golden rays over the rooftops. Inside the dark shed, Ashu sat motionless, his head hanging low. His body was exhausted, but his heart refused to rest. A deep unease settled in his chest, an eerie, unshakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. Outside, Mzee Baraka stood before the gathered villagers, his calm, steady voice breaking the tense silence. "We cannot let fear guide us. If this creature meant harm, it would have acted already. I believe it came seeking help." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Guilt crept into their fear. Mzee Baraka's words pressed against them, forcing them to question their actions. Finally, one man stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we were wrong. Let's release it." A small group of villagers approached the shed, their hands gripping tools. Carefully, they unbolted the heavy door. Sunlight poured in, bathing Ashu's white fur in a golden glow. He blinked against the sudden brightness, his golden eyes filled with wariness. A villager hesitated, then cautiously stepped forward and cut the ropes. "You can go," he murmured, his voice softer than before. Ashu didn't wait. The moment he was free, he bolted, his powerful legs carrying him toward the open savanna. The villagers stood frozen, watching as his large figure faded into the distance. "He's going back to her," someone whispered. Ashu ran, his heart pounding. The wind howled through the dry grass, rustling the brittle stalks like whispers of warning. The sky, heavy with thick grey clouds, loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the savanna. Each step sent dust swirling into the air, and the distant cries of unseen creatures only fueled his growing fear. The dry grass brushed against his legs, but he didn't slow down. His mind was filled with Mama Kessie, her warm smile, her gentle voice. She needed him. He had to get to her. When he reached the hut, the door was slightly open. His pace slowed. Carefully, he pushed it wider. What he saw inside made him stop. Mama Casey lay still on her bed. Her frail hands rested gently on her chest, her face peaceful, as if she was simply sleeping. But Ashu knew. She wasn't asleep. Moving closer, his large frame suddenly felt small in the quiet room. Kneeling beside her, he placed his hand over hers. Cold. A soft, heartbroken sound escaped him, his golden eyes filling with tears. Ashu stayed there for a long time, his head bowed, as if waiting for her to wake. But she didn't move. Hours later, the villagers arrived, led by Mzee Baraka. They entered the hut silently, their steps gentle. When they saw Ashu kneeling beside Mama Kessie, their fear melted into sorrow. The elder placed a comforting hand on Ashu's shoulder. "She's gone, my friend," he said softly. Ashu didn't respond. His grief was quiet but overwhelming, a deep sadness that filled the room. The villagers stood nearby, their hearts heavy with regret. They had pushed Ashu away, whispering in fear, refusing to let him near. And because of that, he had not been by Mama Kessie's side when she needed him most. They realized they had misjudged him, and their fear had kept him away from the one he loved most. As the sun set, painting the sky in orange and purple, Ashu gently carried Mama Casey's body to a spot beneath the large baobab tree near the hut. The villagers followed in silence, offering quiet support. Together, they buried her in the shade of the tree she had always loved. When the last handful of earth covered the grave, Ashu sat beside it, his large hands resting on the ground. He stared at the mound of dirt, his face filled with an emptiness words couldn't describe. The villagers stayed for a while, watching quietly. Then, one by one, they left, giving him time to grieve. For days after Mama Kessie was buried, Ashu didn't move from her grave. He sat beneath the baobab tree, still and silent. The villagers kept their distance, but their feelings toward him had changed. Fear was replaced by guilt, sadness, and in time, respect. Slowly, small gestures of kindness appeared. A woman left a basket of fruit near the grave. Curious children sat nearby, watching him silently. Little by little, the villagers' fear melted away, replaced by something new: admiration. One evening, as the sky glowed in shades of orange and gold, Ashu finally stood. He walked to the edge of the village and sat there, looking out over the open savanna. The villagers saw this as a silent promise. Not that he was leaving, but that he would protect them, just as he had protected Mama Kessie. As days turned into weeks, Ashu began to roam the outskirts of the village. At first, the people were cautious, but they soon noticed something remarkable. He chased away wild animals that threatened their livestock. During a dry season, he led them to a hidden water source. "He's not just an animal," a man said to Mzibaraka one evening. "He's one of us now." The elder nodded, watching Ashu sitting near Mama Casey's grave, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "He was never a danger," Mzibaraka said. "He was a blessing." The villagers decided to honor Mama Kessie and Ashu by building a small stone marker at her grave, a sign of gratitude, not just for all she had done for them, but for the gift of Ashu's loyalty and protection. Over time, Ashu became the village's quiet guardian. One afternoon, as the children played near the baobab tree, a little girl tentatively approached him, holding out a piece of fruit. Ashu hesitated, then gently took it from her, his golden eyes filled with something softer than before. The villagers watched, murmuring among themselves, until one by one, they too stepped forward, offering quiet gestures of acceptance. Later that month, they held a small gathering beneath the tree to honor Mama Kessie's memory, lighting lanterns and sharing stories. And for the first time in a long while, Ashu was not an outsider. He was one of them. His presence brought comfort, safety. To them, he was more than a protector. He was family. In a world filled with fear and prejudice, kindness and understanding have the power to change everything. Ashu, once an outcast, became a protector and a part of the village. Mama Kessie's love and sacrifice were not in vain. They planted the seeds of forgiveness and unity. Have you ever changed your opinion about someone after learning their story? Share your thoughts in the comments.